The air tasted like copper and dust. 4:30 in the morning, 24th of September 1941, and I could already smell what the day would bring. My fingers traced the rim of my coffee cup, lukewarm, bitter, grounds floating on top like dead insects. Someone had brewed it hours ago, someone who might already be dead. The tin cup was dented on one side, the enamel chipped away to reveal rust underneath. I wondered whose cup it had been before mine, whether that man still lived. Probably not. Survival rates for infantry officers were abysmal. 3 months was the average. I had been at the front for 4. I was Hauptmann Friedrich Schulte, 6th Company, 73rd Infantry Division, 11th Army, 31 years old enough to remember the last war as a child's nightmare of absent fathers and empty plates, young enough to believe foolishly that this one would be different. That belief had died somewhere between the Polish border and here, bled out incrementally with each kilometer of advance, each village burned, each pile of bodies left beside the road. The command post smelled of petroleum and unwashed bodies and something else, fear perhaps, though that might have been imagination. Maps covered the table, their edges curling in the humidity that even autumn could not dispel. Someone had marked the Tatar Ditch in heavy black pencil, a scar across the neck of the Perekop Isthmus, 5 to 7 kilometers wide, where Europe squeezed against Crimea like a strangler's hands on a throat. The ditch was old, they said, centuries old, built by Tatars to keep out exactly what we were about to attempt. Medieval engineering still effective against modern war. That should have told us something. Huber stood by the tent flap smoking. Franz Huber, my runner, 23, and already going grey at the temples. The cigarette shook between his fingers. Not from cold, September still held summer's ghost in these steppes. The nights merely cool rather than freezing. Fear, then, or fatigue? Probably both. He had been awake for 36 hours, same as the rest of us. Sleep came in stolen moments, 15-minute intervals between crises. Never enough, never restful, just enough to keep the body functioning at minimum capacity. The cigarette smoke curled upward, blue-grey in the lamplight, dissipating against the canvas ceiling. French tobacco, harsh and acrid. We had looted it from a supply depot weeks ago. Everything was looted now. The supply chain stretched hundreds of kilometers behind us, growing more attenuated with each day of advance. Official rations came irregularly. We supplemented with whatever we found. The artillery preparation was supposed to start at 4:40. I checked my watch. 4:32. 8 minutes. In 8 minutes, the world would split open. I had seen artillery preparations before in Poland, in France, during the early days of Barbarossa. They were always impressive, always violent, always less effective than promised. The staff believed in firepower, in the ability of high explosive to solve problems. The infantry knew better. Artillery softened positions, suppressed defenders, created chaos, but it rarely destroyed. Not completely, not enough. Dietrich came in without knocking, his boots leaving crescent-shaped mud prints on the tarp floor. Ludwig Dietrich, my second in command, older than me by 5 years, a veteran of Poland and France. His face had the texture of saddle leather, all creases and weathered hollows carved by sun and wind and stress. He carried his rifle like an extension of his arm, natural, unconscious. A carabiner, 98K, that had probably killed more men than I had ever commanded. The weapon's wooden stock bore the glossy patina of constant handling, dark with absorbed oil and sweat. He maintained it obsessively, cleaning and oiling every night regardless of circumstance. He told me the men were ready. His voice was flat, drained of inflection. Ready meant they were awake, had ammunition, and had not yet deserted. The bar for readiness had dropped considerably since June. In the early days, ready meant properly equipped, well-fed, motivated. Now it meant conscious and armed. Standards adjusted to reality. I asked about 2nd Platoon. Dietrich said Zimmermann had them in position. Otto Zimmermann, the youngest of my platoon leaders, 24 and still baby-faced despite 3 months of Russia. He worried me, not because he was incompetent. He was frighteningly efficient, a natural soldier with instincts that kept him and his men alive, but because he believed, really believed, in the mission, in victory, in all of it. That kind of faith got men killed quickly out here. Belief made you take risks, made you volunteer, made you lead from the front. All admirable qualities, all likely fatal. 435. The maps showed our objectives with clean, confident lines that bore no relation to reality. First, breach the forward defenses. Second, cross the ditch. Third, push through to the heights beyond. 93 meters, 73 meters, meaningless numbers that some staff officer had marked as tactically significant. As if height meant anything when bullets flew horizontally. As if meters of elevation justified the blood required to take them. I tried to picture it, failed. The landscape beyond our lines was darkness, an absence of information that maps could not fill. Intelligence reported Soviet forces in the tens of thousands, or hundreds of thousands, or just thousands. Intelligence was always certain and always wrong. They drew neat squares representing enemy battalions, colored them red, positioned them with geometric precision. Reality was messier, confused, chaotic. Nothing ever matched the maps. The tent walls rippled in a breeze that smelled of salt marsh and something dead. The Sivash, the putrid sea aptly named, lay to our east, a waste of shallow water and mud that stretched for kilometers. Nothing crossed it, nothing lived in it. It was simply there, a geographic fact that made our approach inevitable and stupid. The Soviets knew where we would come. They always knew. They had built their defenses accordingly, focused everything on the narrow corridor we had to traverse. 438! Huber crushed his cigarette under his boot and immediately lit another. His hands were steadier now. The waiting was worse than the doing. Always had been. In France, I had learned that men could endure almost anything except uncertainty. Even death became manageable once it arrived, reduced to a simple binary, survive or do not. But the moments before, those hollowed out your insides, left you a shell filled with acid and dread and the corrosive knowledge that in minutes you might be dead. Outside, someone was singing. I could not make out the words through the tent canvas, just the melody, something from home, probably Bavaria, the notes rising and falling like a child's lullaby. Strange, what men reached for when dawn brought killing. Music, prayers, photographs of sweethearts they would never see again, talismans against death, as if sentiment could stop bullets. Dietrich checked his rifle for perhaps the 20th time. The bolt moved with a well-oiled whisper, metal sliding on metal, with the precision of German engineering. 5 rounds chambered, 1 already in place. 7.92 by 57mm Mauser cartridges, each one capable of punching through a man at 800 meters. Longer if you knew what you were doing. Dietrich knew. He had fired that rifle so many times that the act had become automatic, a mechanical sequence requiring no conscious thought. I'd once seen him field strip it blindfolded, his fingers moving with absolute confidence in the dark. He claimed it was necessary. Jams happened at night, he said. Had to know the weapon by touch alone. I asked if the ammunition bearers had distributed the extra rounds. Dietrich nodded. Each rifleman carried 60 rounds now, up from the standard 30. Machine gun crews had been given double allotments. 250 rounds per gun, belted and ready in metal containers that hung like saddlebags on the bearers. The MG-34s were good weapons, 900 rounds per minute when they did not jam, which was approximately never under field conditions. Dust got into everything here. Sand, grit, the fine particulate matter that invaded every gap and crevice, grinding moving parts to premature failure. The mud, when it came, would be worse. 440. The first shell screamed overhead before I heard the guns. Sound traveled strangely across these flats, bouncing off the earth at odd angles, arriving late or early, or not at all. The explosion came as a pressure wave against my eardrums, a physical push that made my fillings ache, followed a heartbeat later by the sound itself, a crack that rattled the tent poles and made the lamp swing on its hook. Then the world became noise, artillery preparation. 120 guns, they said, maybe more. I could not count individual pieces through the overwhelming roar. Howitzers, mortars, 88mm flak guns pressed into ground support roles they were never designed for. The staff had assured us this would be comprehensive, overwhelming. Soviet positions would be pulverized, they said. Morale would collapse. Resistance would be minimal. The staff were safely behind us, 15 kilometers from the ditch, in a requisitioned farmhouse with proper beds and hot food. Their confidence in artillery was unshakable. Mine had been shaken repeatedly. I stepped outside. Huber and Dietrich followed. The eastern horizon strobed with muzzle flashes, each one painting the underside of the clouds orange and red. Brief illumination followed by deeper darkness. The shells passed overhead in waves, audible as a rushing like wind through a tunnel. Then impact, flash, smoke, earth fountaining upward in black columns that hung in the air like twisted trees, silhouetted against the pre-dawn murk. Beautiful in a way, terrible but beautiful. The aesthetics of destruction. Mankind had become very good at killing, had refined it to an art form complete with visual spectacle and overwhelming sound. Wagner would have approved. The Soviet positions were obscured by smoke and dust, a roiling cloud that obscured everything beyond 200 meters. I could see tracers rising from their lines, anti-aircraft fire probably, desperate shots at sounds in the dark, ineffective. Our artillery was too far back, beyond their range. Only we would taste their return fire when it came, and it would come. The Soviets always answered artillery with artillery. Tit for tat, mutual destruction. Men were gathering in the assembly areas. Dark shapes in the pre-dawn murk, hunched under the weight of equipment. Each soldier carried approximately 30 kilograms. Rifle, ammunition, grenades, entrenching tool, gas mask, water bottles, rations, extra socks, first aid kit, shelter half. Some had more. Machine gun crews hauled their weapons and tripods between them, the barrels wrapped in canvas to keep out the dust that would destroy them within hours of exposure. Ammunition bearers staggered under the weight of metal boxes, their shoulders rubbed raw despite padding. I found Zimmerman with 2nd Platoon. He saluted crisply, regulation perfect. I told him to save it for the parade ground. Field salutes identified officers for snipers. He grinned, embarrassed. Young officers always saluted. It was trained into them at officer school, drilled until it became reflex. Hard to break reflexes even when they became liabilities. He asked if the artillery would be enough. I said it was never enough, had never been enough, would never be enough. The artillery made us feel better, made the staff feel competent, gave the appearance of overwhelming force. But it rarely killed as many as we hoped. The Russians built deep, bunkers, trenches, tunnels, 3-meter-thick concrete reinforced with railroad ties. They learned from the last war too. Defense in depth, prepared positions, interlocking fields of fire. Textbook. Zimmerman's face fell slightly. He had hoped for easy. There was no easy here, no victories without cost. The mathematics of modern war were brutally simple. Attack usually cost 3 times what defense cost. We paid in blood for every meter of advance. The shelling continued. 30 minutes according to the plan. Then we would advance. 2 companies in the first wave, mine and 4th. We would move on foot across 3 kilometers of open ground toward fortified positions held by an enemy who had spent weeks preparing to kill us. Simple, clean, suicidal, but orders were orders and the machine required feeding. 4:55. Dietrich handed me my rifle. I had left it in the tent, stupid. Never be separated from your weapon, that was basic. drilled into every recruit from day one. I was slipping. Too much coffee, too little sleep. Too many nights staring at maps that lied about the terrain, about enemy strength, about everything that mattered. The rifle felt heavy, heavier than it should. I checked the chamber, round present, bolt locked, magazine full, safety on, everything correct, everything wrong. The weapon was fine. It was me who was malfunctioning, the human component failing under stress. Huber offered me a cigarette. I took it, though I rarely smoked. The tobacco was harsh, cut with something that tasted like burnt rope. French, probably. Looted from some depot months ago, passed through a dozen hands before reaching mine. It helped. The nicotine sharpened everything, brought the world into focus with painful clarity, made the colors brighter, the sounds louder, the smell of fear more distinct. 5 o'clock. The artillery shifted. Longer range now, walking the barrage forward in 50-meter increments. This was our signal. The forward defenses should be, in theory, suppressed, softened, weakened. The words the staff used to describe what high explosive did to human beings. Clinical language that obscured reality. Suppressed meant terrified, pinned in bunkers, some dead, many wounded, all deafened and disoriented. Softened meant the wire might be cut in places. Some trenches collapsed, bunkers damaged, but probably still functional. Weakened meant they could still kill us, just perhaps not as efficiently. I gave the order. Second platoon moved first, Zimmerman leading from the front as I knew he would. Then first platoon under Sergeant Kraus, a grizzled veteran who should have been commissioned but lacked the social class. Then third and fourth in reserve, ready to exploit success or cover failure. 130 men, more or less. Some companies were down to 80. Attrition was constant out here, a grinding that never stopped. Disease, accidents, desertion, combat. The manpower reports looked like actuarial tables, statistical analyses of death. We moved in file through the communication trenches. The trenches were new, dug yesterday by pioneers with picks and shovels, still smelling of fresh earth and disturbed roots. They zigzagged to avoid enfilade fire, which meant we stumbled blindly through right-angled turns in the darkness, banging knees and elbows against the walls, cursing under our breath. Someone ahead of me was breathing too fast, on the edge of hyperventilation. I could hear him gasping, little whimpers on the exhale. Fear response. Normal, autonomic. The body flooding itself with adrenaline, preparing for fight or flight. If he started screaming, I would have to deal with it. For now, I let it go. Men worked through fear in different ways. As long as they kept moving, kept functioning, I did not care how they sounded. The trench ended at a shallow depression lined with sandbags, assembly point. We crouched there, waiting. Dawn was coming, grey light seeping into the eastern sky like dirty water through cloth. I could start to make out shapes now. Men, weapons, equipment. The burned-out hulk of a supply truck someone had left here days ago, its metal skeleton twisted by fire. Blackened bones of a mechanical corpse. 5:15. Zimmerman raised his hand. Time. I nodded. He blew his whistle. 3 short blasts, inaudible in the artillery noise, but men saw and understood. Visual signals when sound was impossible. Second platoon went over the lip of the depression and disappeared into the smoke, swallowed by the grey murk within seconds. Then first platoon, then us. My turn. I climbed over the sandbags, scrambling awkwardly with rifle in one hand, and stepped into open ground. Into the killing zone. The ground was harder than I expected. Baked earth, with a thin crust of dry grass that crunched under our boots. Not quiet. Nothing about this was quiet. The artillery had stopped. Sudden, shocking silence that hurt more than the noise had. My ears rang with a high, persistent whine that would not stop. Tinnitus. Permanent hearing damage. Small price for survival. In the silence, I heard the Soviet machine guns open up. The sound was distinctive. That rapid hammering that came faster than the MG-34s, 1,500 rounds per minute from their Maxims. Old guns, water-cooled, heavy as sin. but effective. Horribly effective. The high rate of fire created a sound like tearing cloth, continuous and deadly. Tracers floated toward us, deceptively slow from a distance. They seemed to drift, lazy arcs of green fire that only revealed their speed when they snapped past your head with a crack like breaking bone. The human eye could not track their true velocity. Optical illusion made them appear manageable. They were not. Men dropped. I did not see who, could not see in the smoke and dust. Someone ahead screamed, a high, thin sound that cut through everything, then stopped. Either dead or coherent enough to shut up. Pain made men scream initially. Terror kept them quiet after. You learned fast that noise attracted fire. I ran. Everyone ran. You could not walk through machine gun fire. The body would not allow it. Some primitive part of the brain took over, flooded you with chemicals that made your legs pump and your heart hammer, and your vision narrow to a tunnel focused on the ground directly ahead. Conscious thought ceased. Instinct drove you forward or down. Something tugged at my left sleeve. I glanced down. 2 neat holes through the fabric where the sleeve had bunched, entry and exit perfectly aligned. The bullet had passed through both layers without touching skin. Luck. Pure luck. That was all that kept anyone alive out here. Skill helped, training helped, experience helped, but in the end it came down to whether the bullet found you or missed by millimeters. The smoke thickened. Cordite from our shells, dust from impacts, something else, chemical, acrid, that burned the back of my throat and made my eyes water. I pulled my gas mask up, not onto my face, but ready. Gas was unlikely. Both sides had mostly stopped using it after the early disasters. But the fear never went away. Chlorine, phosgene, mustard, invisible death that rotted your lungs and left you drowning on dry land. 50 meters. The objective was somewhere ahead. A trench line, supposedly. I could not see it. Could not see anything except smoke and the vague shapes of men running. Dietrich was beside me, his face set in that expression I knew. Absolute focus, the world reduced to breath and movement and the next step forward. He ran with his rifle ready, finger outside the trigger guard, safe until needed. 20 meters. The ground exploded. Not artillery, mine. Someone ahead had triggered an S-mine. I hit the dirt as shrapnel whined overhead, close enough to feel the air displacement. The S-mine was a beautiful weapon from an engineering perspective, spring-loaded canister that popped up to waist height before detonating, sending 300 steel balls in a 360-degree arc. Perfect for clearing trenches, for killing men who thought they were in cover, perfect for shredding anyone within 20 meters. The screaming started again. Multiple voices this time. I could not help them, could not stop. Had to keep moving or the machine guns would find me. Triage happened automatically now. Dead men were irrelevant. Wounded men were someone else's problem. Only reaching the objective mattered. 10 meters. The Soviet trench appeared suddenly, a shadow in the smoke. Men inside, shapes and muzzle flashes. Someone threw a stick grenade. Ours, not theirs. I recognized the wooden handle tumbling end over end. The explosion was muffled, contained by the trench walls. More screaming, then rifle fire, rapid and panicked. I slid into the trench feet first, landed hard on something soft that grunted. A body. Soviet by the uniform. Not dead, stunned. I reversed my rifle and struck down with the butt, putting my weight behind it. The helmet rang like a bell. The body went limp. Whether dead or unconscious, I did not know and did not care. Dietrich landed beside me, already firing. The carabiner cracked 5 times in rapid succession. He was good, very good, did not waste rounds. 5 shots, 5 distinct target acquisitions. Bolt manipulation so fast it seemed automatic. Training and muscle memory, the rifle an extension of his will. The trench was chaos. Hand to hand in some sections, men grappling in the narrow space where rifles were useless, too long to swing effectively. Bayonets, entrenching tools, anything with an edge or weight. The smell was overwhelming. Blood, shit, the iron tang of fresh death mixed with cordite and sweat. I shot a man in the chest. He was 3 meters away, coming at me with a rifle. The round caught him center mass and spun him sideways. He fell against the trench wall and slid down, leaving a smear of blood on the earth. His eyes were open, surprised. Probably thought the bombardment had killed everyone. Probably thought he was safe emerging from the bunker. He was wrong. No one was safe. Zimmermann appeared, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. Shrapnel, probably, or a ricochet. Head wounds bled profusely even when minor. He shouted something I could not hear over the ringing in my ears. I shook my head. He shouted again, closer this time, directly into my ear. Sector clear. First platoon had the trench. I nodded. Consolidate, prepare for counterattack. The Russians always counterattacked, always. Textbook Soviet doctrine. Never yield ground without attempting to retake it. Sometimes immediately, sometimes after artillery preparation, but always. We organized quickly, wounded to the rear. 3 men with serious injuries, bleeding that needed immediate attention. 1 already dead. His name was... I could not remember. Should remember. Would need to write the letter to his family. Later. If there was a later. The administration of death never stopped. The dead Soviet I had hit was still breathing. Shallow, ragged breaths that bubbled with blood. Lung shot, probably. He would not last. Someone should end it. No one did. We were too busy preparing defenses, too focused on immediate survival to waste ammunition on mercy. He died while we worked, his breathing stopping sometime between organizing ammunition and positioning the machine gun. I noticed the silence where his breathing had been. 5:45. The counterattack came exactly when I expected, 30 minutes after we took the position. Textbook. The Russians were predictable that way, which was both advantage and disadvantage. You knew it was coming but could not stop it. Could only prepare, position weapons, distribute ammunition, hope you had enough. Artillery first. Their guns firing at their own positions now that we held them. The shells landed close, so close that dirt rained into the trench, and the concussion made my chest hurt, compressed my lungs against my ribs. They were not trying for precision, just saturation. Clear us out or bury us, either worked from their perspective. Then infantry. Grey shapes in the smoke advancing in lines, disciplined. These were not militia, not the conscript farmers and factory workers we had been fighting. Regular army, possibly guards. They came steadily, rifles at port arms, using the smoke as cover, moving with tactical sense, fire and movement covering each other. The machine gun, thank God someone had brought it forward, opened up. The MG-34 hammered away, belt-fed ammunition rattling through the mechanism. The gunner walked his fire across the advancing line, left to right, methodical. Men fell, others kept coming, stepping over the fallen without breaking stride. I fired until my rifle was empty. 5 rounds. Reloaded from the pouch on my belt, stripper clip sliding into the magazine with practiced ease. Fired again. The bolt grew hot under my hand, metal conducting heat from the chamber and barrel. The barrel would be scorching after sustained fire. Keep shooting and it would warp, lose accuracy, potentially rupture. Stop shooting and they would overrun us. Simple mathematics of survival. Dietrich was beside me, methodical as a machine. Fire, bolt back, eject, load, bolt forward, chamber, fire. His face was expressionless, focused entirely on the mechanical sequence. He had done this so many times it had become routine. Murder as muscle memory, killing divorced from emotion, reduced to pure mechanics. Something hit the trench wall beside my head. I flinched, expecting shrapnel, expecting pain. Instead, mud, just mud, thrown up by a near miss. My heart hammered so hard I thought it would crack my ribs. Adrenaline dump, the body preparing for trauma that did not arrive. False alarm, but the biochemical response was identical. The Soviet wave broke. Not from our fire, though we had killed enough of them, bodies piling up 50 meters out, but from their own artillery. Someone had miscalculated, fired too short. Shells landed among the advancing infantry, cutting them down as effectively as we had. Friendly fire. It happened all the time. The artillery was kilometers away, firing blind, guided by map coordinates that were always slightly wrong. Artillery spotters tried to correct, but in the smoke and chaos, corrections arrived late or not at all. The survivors retreated. We did not pursue. Only idiots left prepared positions to chase a beaten enemy. Let them go. They would be back. The machine required constant feeding on both sides. 6:30. The sun was up now, burning off the smoke. I could see the battlefield clearly for the first time. Wished I could not. Bodies everywhere, hundreds, maybe thousands. Ours and theirs, impossible to separate in the carnage. German field grey and Soviet khaki mixed together in death's democracy. The ground between our start line and the captured trench was carpeted with dead and dying. Some moved, crawling, reaching toward nothing. Others lay still in positions that looked almost comfortable, as if sleeping. Peaceful, if you ignored the blood. The smell hit me, sweet and copper and shit, underlaid with the chemical reek of explosives. Human bodies released their contents in death, sphincters relaxing, bladders emptying. The result was an overwhelming stench that made breathing difficult. I turned and vomited into the trench, heaving until nothing came up but bile. No one noticed. Half the men were doing the same. Bodies adjusted to violence faster than minds. The stomach rebelled at what the brain accepted. Huber appeared with water. I rinsed my mouth, spat, asked for casualties. 18 dead, 23 wounded, 7 seriously. Out of 130, 14% losses in the first hour. Acceptable by current standards. Horrifying by any sane measure. We were succeeding ourselves to death, winning battles while losing the war of attrition. Zimmerman had taken shrapnel in the leg. Nothing serious, metal fragments from a grenade embedded in his thigh. Painful, but not debilitating. He refused evacuation. Foolish. The wound would get infected in this filth. Bacteria thrived here, fed by blood and decay. But I understood. Leaving felt like abandonment. Staying felt like duty. Honor mattered to him still. To me, it had become an abstract concept, something from before. We held this trench for 6 hours while the battle moved around us. Other units pushed forward, took other positions. The assault guns, Stuggy 3s, low and squat like mechanical toads, rumbled past our flank, heading toward the ditch. I watched them go with a mixture of envy and pity. Armor was safer than infantry, usually, unless the tank caught fire. Then it became a steel coffin, the crew burning alive inside while ammunition cooked off and made the hull jump with secondary explosions. The attack stalled at the ditch itself. I learned this from runners, from shouted conversations with units on our flanks. The ditch was wider than expected, deeper than maps showed. Soviet engineers had improved on the Tatar original, added concrete bunkers and minefields and wire, lots of wire. Coil upon coil of it, some electrified, some simply massed in sufficient density to stop men and vehicles. By noon, we had orders to advance again. Support the assault on the ditch. My men were exhausted, filthy, half of them injured to some degree. We advanced anyway. Orders were orders. The machine had momentum, and momentum had to be maintained, or the entire offensive would collapse. The landscape between the first trench line and the ditch was moonscape. Craters overlapping craters, each one deep enough to hide a man. Shell holes full of stagnant water that stank of chemicals and decay. Trees, there had been trees here once, reduced to splintered stumps, raw wood bright against the black earth. Nature obliterated by industry. We moved slowly, had to. The ground was mined. Pioneers had marked safe paths with white tape, narrow corridors through the minefield. But the tape was torn and muddied, and sometimes just gone, blown away by artillery or removed by helpful Soviets. We walked in single file, each man stepping exactly where the man ahead had stepped. Even then, someone triggered a mine. I did not see who. Just heard the blast and the screaming. The mine had taken both his legs at the knee. He would not last. Did not last. bled out while we waited for the medics who never came. The ditch appeared gradually, first as a shadow on the horizon, then as a genuine obstacle, 8 meters wide, 4 meters deep, the sides reinforced with timber and sandbags. An engineering marvel. Soviet positions lined the far side, firing continuously. Tracers crisscrossed the gap in patterns too complex to navigate. Anyone trying to cross would be cut down mid-stride. Simple geometry. The ditch created a perfect killing zone, and the Soviets had prepared accordingly. Engineers had brought up bridging equipment. I watched them work under fire, assembling metal frameworks that would span the ditch. Brave men. Insane men. The same thing, probably. 2 were killed while I watched. A mortar round landed directly on their position, obliterating them. Others took their places without hesitation. The Corps of Engineers had a reputation for courage. Watching them, I believed it. The first bridge went up at 1500 hours. Infantry rushed across, 4th Company, not mine. I watched them go, silhouettes against the sky. The bridge swayed under their weight, metal flexing but holding. Soviet mortars found the range within seconds. The bridge vanished in smoke and fire. When the smoke cleared, it was gone. Just gone. Twisted metal in the water below, bodies floating face down, weighted by equipment, drowning in shallow water because they could not swim with 30 kilograms on their backs. They built another bridge, same result, and another. By dusk, 3 bridges had been destroyed and we had not gotten a single squad across the ditch intact. The engineers kept trying. That was their job. Build bridges, absorb losses, repeat. The casualty rate for combat engineers was astronomical. Worse than infantry, worse than anyone except perhaps flamethrower operators. Night fell. We dug in where we were, 200 meters from the ditch, close enough to hear Soviet voices drifting across the gap. They were singing. I could not understand the words, but recognized the melody. Something mournful, minor key. Funeral music, perhaps for their dead, perhaps preparing for their own deaths. Music had power here, connected men to something beyond immediate survival, reminded them they were human, not simply meat for the grinder. Huber found me a position in what had once been a machine gun nest. Sandbags provided some protection from shrapnel. Not much, but some. I settled in, back against the bags, and tried to sleep. Could not. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the bridge collapsing, saw men falling, heard them screaming. The sounds were worse than the sights somehow. Vision could be suppressed, forgotten. Sound invaded, embedded itself in memory where it played on loop, endless and terrible. Dietrich sat nearby, cleaning his rifle again, always cleaning. The bolt moved back and forth, clicking softly in the darkness. Meditative. He found peace in maintenance, in the simple mechanical tasks that confirmed the weapon would fire when needed. Control over a small thing when everything else was chaos. I asked how he was holding up. He said he was fine. Everyone said they were fine. Fine was meaningless. A polite lie we told each other to maintain the pretense of function. No one was fine. We were all damaged, breaking in slow motion, our minds fracturing under stress while our bodies continued to perform. He asked about tomorrow. I said we would try again. Same bridge, same ditch, same result. The definition of insanity, trying the same thing and expecting different outcomes. But orders were orders, and logic had no place here. The plan was the plan. We would execute it until we succeeded or died, or someone higher up acknowledged reality and changed the plan. Somewhere to our left, someone was crying. Not wounded. Those sounds were different, sharp and immediate. This was despair, pure and undiluted. The sound of a man who had reached his limit and found it insufficient. An officer would find him eventually, tell him to stop. If he did not stop, they would shoot him or send him to the rear or simply ignore him until he screamed himself hoarse. Breakdowns happened. Could not be prevented, only managed. 25th of September, Dawn came cold and grey, frost on the ground, the first real cold since we had pushed into Ukraine. Winter was coming. Everyone felt it, though no one spoke of it. Winter in Russia. Even the words carried weight, historical memory of previous invasions that had failed when the weather turned. Napoleon. We did not speak his name. Superstition, perhaps, or the unwillingness to acknowledge what we all knew. We were supposed to attack at 0600. The attack was delayed. Equipment problems, someone said. The real reason was simpler. The men were breaking. You could see it in their faces, the way they moved. Slow, mechanical, going through motions without thought. Shell shock, combat fatigue, battle neurosis. The medical terms were irrelevant. What mattered was they could barely function, needed rest, needed safety, needed anything except more combat. Would not get it. The offensive required momentum. Zimmerman's leg had swollen overnight. The wound was infected, as I had known it would be. He limped badly but refused to admit it. Pride, stupidity, the same thing. He thought showing weakness was failure. Did not understand that everyone was weak. Everyone was failing. Maintaining the pretense exhausted us further. I ordered him to the rear. He refused, said his platoon needed him, said he could still fight. I repeated the order, pulled rank, made it official. He obeyed, but his face showed what he thought of me. Coward, sending him away while we stayed. He did not understand, probably would not until years from now, if he lived that long. The infected leg would kill him faster than bullets if he stayed. The attack launched at 0900. Different approach this time. Assault guns would suppress the bunkers while engineers threw smoke grenades to obscure the crossing point. Infantry would rush across under cover, combined arms. The theory was sound. Theory and practice diverged, as always. The assault guns fired, their short-barreled 75mm guns cracking steadily. High explosive shells impacted on the bunkers, throwing up plumes of smoke and concrete dust. Looked effective from here, probably did nothing. The bunkers were built to withstand this. Soviet engineers knew their business. Concrete 2 meters thick would stop anything short of a direct hit from heavy artillery. Smoke grenades detonated along the ditch. White phosphorus, thick and choking, good concealment, also toxic. Breathing it caused lung damage, chemical burns in the respiratory tract. We had no choice, visibility or death. We chose visibility. First platoon charged under Sergeant Kraus. I watched them go, 30 men running through smoke toward an objective they could not see. Mad, heroic, necessary, they disappeared into the white cloud within seconds. The smoke cleared faster than expected. Wind, probably, or just bad luck. The platoon was caught mid-crossing, exposed on a makeshift bridge that consisted of 3 tree trunks lashed together. Precarious. Barely functional. Good enough until it was not. Soviet fire was immediate and total. Machine guns, rifles, mortars, everything they had. The bridge splintered under the onslaught. Men fell into the ditch, weighted down by equipment, drowning in 4 meters of filthy water. Those who could swim shed their gear and tried to swim back. Most did not make it. Exhaustion, cold water, bullets finding them mid-stroke. 10 men made it across. 10 out of 30. They took cover on the far side and held. Somehow held. Firing back at targets they could barely see, keeping Soviet heads down through sheer volume of fire and force of will. Ammunition expenditure was enormous. They would run dry within minutes without resupply. Second wave went across. My turn. I did not want to. Every fiber of my being screamed to stay, to survive, to let someone else die on that bridge. I went anyway. Training, duty, shame, whatever you wanted to call it. The combination of factors that made men do things their bodies rejected. The bridge was slick with blood. I nearly fell twice, caught myself on the ropes someone had strung as handrails, rough fiber cutting into my palms. The ditch yawned below, dark water reflecting nothing. Bodies floated down there, face down, equipment pulling them under. becoming part of the obstacle, adding to the horror. A bullet cracked past my ear, too close. I felt the pressure wave, heard the supersonic snap, ducked lower, kept moving. 3 more steps, 2, 1, made it. Threw myself into the captured position and lay there, gasping. My heart felt like it would burst, hammering against my ribs, hard enough to hurt. My hands shook so badly I could not have aimed a rifle if I tried. Dietrich landed beside me. Then Huber. Then 3 more men whose names I had forgotten or never learned. Not enough. We needed a full platoon to hold this position. We had maybe 20 men total. 20 against however many the Soviets could bring forward. The mathematics were unfavorable. The bunker complex on the far side was larger than intelligence had reported. Intelligence was always wrong. They drew neat diagrams based on aerial reconnaissance and prisoner interrogation. Reality was different. Concrete walls 2 meters thick, multiple firing ports, underground tunnels connecting them, grenade sumps at the entrances, designed by someone who understood defense, who knew how attackers would approach and prepared accordingly. We cleared them one at a time. Brutal work. Throw grenades into the entrance, wait for detonation, rush in before the smoke clears while defenders were still stunned, shoot anything that moves. Room by room, tunnel by tunnel, lost 4 men doing it. Ugly deaths in confined spaces where bullets ricocheted and shrapnel had nowhere to go except through flesh. The first bunker took an hour, the second took longer. They were ready for us, knew our tactics. We had to improvise. Dietrich found a ventilation shaft, dropped grenades down it. The explosions in the confined space were devastating. When we entered, everyone inside was dead or dying. Concussion injuries, internal bleeding, ruptured organs. They drowned in their own blood while we watched, unable or unwilling to help. Mercy was a luxury we could not afford. By noon, we held 3 bunkers. The Soviets held 7, stalemate. We lacked the manpower to continue. They lacked the willpower to counterattack. We lay in our respective fortifications and shot at each other whenever someone was careless enough to move. Mutual attrition. The afternoon was quiet, relatively. Sniper fire, occasional mortar rounds, machine gun bursts when someone thought they saw movement. But no major attacks. Both sides were spent, drawing breath before the next round. I used the time to write letters. 3 dead in the bunker assault, plus the 8 from yesterday, who I had not yet documented. 11 letters total. Dear Frau Schmidt, I regret to inform you that your husband... The words were formula, meaningless. I wrote them anyway because the alternative was worse. Silence. Families deserving to know that their sons and husbands and fathers had died for... what exactly? Ground. Meters of ground. Strategic objectives. Words that meant nothing to the grieving. Dietrich found food, tinned meat, bread so hard it had to be soaked in water to be edible. We ate mechanically, tasting nothing. Fuel for bodies that needed calories to continue dying. The body's needs were simple. The minds were impossible. Night again. I had lost track of time. Was this the 2nd night or 3rd? The hours blurred together, indistinguishable except for the quality of the light. Days melted into each other, creating a single continuous experience of violence and exhaustion. Soviet artillery opened up after dark. Harassment fire, not a barrage. Random shells dropping across the bridgehead, keeping us awake and afraid. Effective, cheap, no risk to them, constant pressure on us. Psychological warfare as efficient as physical. Fear eroded men as surely as bullets. A shell landed 20 meters from my position. The concussion slammed me against the bunker wall. My ears rang. Vision went white for a moment. When it cleared, I was on the floor, unsure how I had gotten there. Blood in my mouth, bitten tongue, probably. The taste of copper. I checked myself. Arms, legs, torso, everything present. No obvious wounds. Concussion then. Would feel it tomorrow, if there was a tomorrow. Headaches, nausea, sensitivity to light and sound. Small prices. Huber pulled me up, asked if I was hurt. I did not know, still did not know. The body lied about damage, flooded with endorphins that masked injury. Men walked on broken bones, fought with punctured lungs, died without realizing they were already dead. The night stretched forever. Each minute was an hour, each hour a week. Time became elastic, meaningless. There was only now, the present moment of survival, endlessly repeating. Past and future collapsed into the eternal present of war. 26th of September, or maybe the 27th. I had lost count. Days bled together in a haze of exhaustion and violence. The calendar was an abstraction. Only the sun mattered, rising and setting, marking cycles we survived. We held the bridgehead. Reinforcements had crossed during the night. Another company, maybe two. The position was stronger now. Not strong enough, never enough, but better than it had been. We had depth now, reserves, could absorb casualties without immediate collapse. Orders came down, push forward, take the heights, the same heights we had been trying to take since this started. 93 meters, 73 meters, numbers on a map. Hills in reality, crowned with bunkers and trenches and wire. Terrain features that dominated the surrounding area, gave observers clear fields of fire and artillery spotters perfect visibility. The attack began at first light. I had stopped trying to understand the larger picture. Division's plan, corps' strategy, army's objectives, all irrelevant. My world had shrunk to what I could see from my position. 50 meters in any direction, no more. Beyond that was unknown, irrelevant, someone else's problem. We moved forward in short rushes, sprint to cover, drop, catch breath, sprint again. Infantry tactics reduced to basics. Fire came from everywhere. Snipers, machine guns, mortars. The ground erupted around us in fountains of black earth. Lost 2 men crossing open ground. 1 second they were there, the next they were down. No drama, no final words, just alive, then not. The efficiency of it was almost beautiful in its horror. The heights appeared gradually. Not dramatic, not imposing, just a gentle rise in the ground, maybe 20 meters total elevation. But 20 meters was enough for clear fields of fire, for enfilade positions, for all the advantages terrain could provide. Whoever held the heights controlled the battlefield. Soviet trenches ringed the heights in concentric circles. We attacked the outer ring at 1000 hours. The fighting was different here, slower, more deliberate. Room clearing in open trenches, methodical murder, checking corners, clearing dugouts, ensuring no one lived to shoot you in the back. I shot a man at arm's length, saw his eyes widen in the instant before the bullet entered his chest, watched him fall, stepped over him and moved to the next firing position. No time for reflection, no space for emotion, just movement and violence and survival. Dietrich was everywhere, his rifle cracking steadily. He had developed an economy of motion that was almost graceful. No wasted movement, no unnecessary shots. Just target acquisition and elimination, repeated until the magazine was empty. Then reload and continue. Mechanical. Perfect. We took the outer trench by noon. The inner ring was stronger. Pre-sighted machine gun positions covered every approach. We tried twice to advance. Twice we were driven back with losses. 7 dead, 11 wounded. The numbers accumulated, death by accounting. The assault guns arrived at 1400 hours. 2 Stu G3s, low-slung and ugly, their short-barreled guns jutting forward like snouts. They rumbled up to the trench line and began firing at point-blank range into the Soviet positions. 75mm high-explosive shells at 50 meters. Devastating. Effective, brutally effective. The shells smashed through sandbags and timber, collapsing bunkers, burying men alive. Overpressure alone killed in enclosed spaces, rupturing organs and bursting blood vessels. After 30 minutes, the Soviet fire slackened noticeably. We went in behind the assault guns, infantry following armor, using the vehicles as mobile cover. It worked until it did not. A Soviet anti-tank gun, hidden until then, fired from a concealed position. The first round missed, sailing over the Stugie's low profile. The second hit the lead Stugie in the engine deck. The assault gun did not explode. That was Hollywood fantasy. Instead, it caught fire. Thick black smoke poured from the rear grills where the engine compartment was located. The crew bailed out, hatches opening, men rolling away from the vehicle as flames engulfed it. One man, the driver I think, slower to exit from his frontal position, was too slow. His uniform caught fire. He ran 3 meters before falling, still burning. Screaming, always screaming. Fire deaths were the worst. Men accepted bullets, accepted shrapnel. Fire they could not accept. The second Stugie reversed quickly, seeking cover. Soviet infantry rushed the burning vehicle, hoping to capture or destroy it. We killed them. Simple. They exposed themselves, and we shot them down. Easy targets. They kept coming anyway. Bravery or desperation. The same thing, probably. By 1500 hours, the position was ours. Cost 23 dead, 38 wounded. I could not remember what we had gained. Ground. Meters of ground. Dirt and blood and corpses. Strategic value that would be explained in reports I would never read. Night. Third night? Fourth? Numbers were meaningless. There was only the eternal present of survival and the vague memory of a time before this, a time when I had been someone else, someone who slept in beds and ate at tables and believed in things. We consolidated the heights, dug new positions, improved the Soviet ones we had captured. The work was mechanical, mindless, good. Thinking led to despair, to the realization that this would continue indefinitely. That survival today meant dying tomorrow, that we were already dead, our deaths scheduled, delayed temporarily by luck and tactics. Huber had acquired vodka from somewhere, Soviet vodka, harsh enough to strip paint, 100 proof or higher, industrial alcohol flavored with whatever was available. We passed the bottle around, sharing in violation of every regulation. No one cared. Regulations were for peacetime, for people who had not spent 3 days in hell. Dietrich drank deeply and coughed. His hands were black with powder residue, nails broken, knuckles split and bleeding. He looked at them with vague surprise, as if they belonged to someone else. Dissociation, the mind protecting itself by disconnecting from the body. I asked how much ammunition remained. He said enough, maybe. If the supply line held, if the trucks got through, if, always if. War ran on logistics, on the boring necessities of food and fuel and ammunition. Battles were won by clerks as much as soldiers, by the unglamorous work of keeping men fed and armed. The bottle came to me. I drank. The vodka burned, cauterizing something inside that had been bleeding since this started. Not healing. Just stopping the hemorrhage temporarily, numbing, forgetting, chemical relief from consciousness. Someone was praying. I could hear the murmur from the next position. Catholic prayers, probably. Hail Mary, full of grace. Or Protestant. Did not matter. God was absent from this place. If he existed, he had long since abandoned the Perekop. Or perhaps he was here, watching, judging. That thought was worse. 28th of September. The dawn was beautiful. Clear sky, the first stars fading as light spread across the eastern horizon. Birds sang. I had not realized there were still birds here, life persisting in the presence of death, nature indifferent to human suffering, continuing its cycles regardless. Orders, always orders. Advance again, push deeper into the Soviet positions, break them, break through. The offensive required momentum. Stopping meant defeat. Forward was the only direction. We advanced. The Soviet resistance had stiffened overnight. Fresh troops, probably. Reinforcements from the Crimean garrison brought up during darkness. They fought with renewed vigor, counterattacking repeatedly. Well coordinated, supported by artillery. Professional. Lost Huber that morning. He was 3 meters ahead of me, running between positions. A mortar round landed close, not direct hit. Those left nothing to bury. Close enough. Shrapnel took him across the chest and throat. He went down hard, thrashing. I reached him in seconds. Too late. Blood everywhere, arterial spray that meant death in minutes, maybe faster. He tried to speak, bubbles forming on his lips, could not form words. The throat wound made speech impossible. I held his hand while he died. Took 40 seconds, felt like hours. His grip weakened gradually, fingers loosening until his hand went limp in mine. Dietrich pulled me away. Had to keep moving, had to. Stopping meant death. Huber was gone, others would follow. The mathematics were simple and terrible. We were a diminishing resource, consumed by combat at calculable rates. We pushed forward because that was all we could do. The Soviet lines buckled, bent but did not break. Textbook defense in depth. Trade space for casualties. Bleed the attacker until he could not continue. Let time and distance do the work. By afternoon, we had advanced maybe 500 meters. Cost was horrifying. The company was down to 60 men, 60 out of 130, 54% casualties in 4 days. Unsustainable, a mathematics problem with only one solution. I found a command post, a shell hole with a canvas tarp stretched across it, and tried to organize what remained. Platoon structure had collapsed. I had squads at best. Formed them into 2 groups, put Dietrich in charge of one. Improvisation replacing organization. Orders came down. Hold position. No further advance today. Tomorrow, maybe, or the day after. Always tomorrow. That mythical time when things would be different, when the breakthrough would come, when victory would justify the cost. Night fell again. The pattern was established now. Fight all day, dig in at night, die a little with each cycle. Sustainable for a while, not forever. Eventually, the mathematics would catch up. There would be too few of us left to hold, too few to attack. The offensive would stall and we would withdraw or die where we stood. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, I had to keep 60 men alive. Simple, impossible, necessary. The Soviet artillery had found our range. Shells dropped regularly throughout the night, random impacts that made sleep impossible. Not that sleep would have come anyway. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Huber dying, saw his hand reaching for mine, felt the moment life left him, that indefinable something that separated living flesh from meat. Dietrich sat beside me, his rifle across his knees. He had not slept in days. None of us had. Real sleep. The deep unconsciousness that brought rest. We dozed in fragments, 30-second intervals between crises. Micro-sleep that the body stole when it could. He asked if I thought we would make it. I said probably not. The odds were poor. Statistical analysis suggested complete replacement of personnel within 6 weeks at current casualty rates. But I had thought we would die in France, and we had not. Had thought Poland would kill us. Russia would finish the job, most likely. Simple statistics. You could only cheat death so many times before the house won. He accepted this with a nod. We sat in silence, listening to the artillery, companionable. 2 men who had run out of words but found comfort in shared misery. Understanding without speaking. The bond that combat created, stronger than friendship, deeper than love. Brothers in survival. 29th of September. The attack resumed at dawn. Same routine, artillery preparation, smoke, infantry assault. The Soviet positions had been reinforced again overnight. Fresh wire, new minefields. We gained ground in meters, paid for it in lives. Dietrich was hit mid-morning. Machine gun burst caught him across the left shoulder, spinning him around. He went down in the open, exposed. I dragged him to cover, a shell crater half filled with muddy water. He was conscious, swearing steadily in a low monotone. Good. Swearing meant alive, meant functioning. Silence was death. The wound was bad, but not fatal. Bone fragments visible in the torn flesh, blood pulsing with each heartbeat. I applied a pressure bandage, cinching it tight. He screamed. Good. Screaming meant alive, meant nerves still worked. I gave him morphine from my aid kit, the syringe stabbing through uniform fabric into his thigh. He relaxed almost immediately, eyes going distant. Chemical peace. He told me to leave him, take his rifle, his ammunition. Someone would collect him eventually, or not. Men died in shell holes all the time, overlooked in the chaos. I stayed, could not leave him. He was the last link to the company as it had been, before this meat grinder destroyed it. If he died, I would be alone with strangers who wore familiar uniforms. Connection mattered, memory mattered. He was both. A runner found us, young private whose name I never learned. Orders, fall back. The attack had failed. Too many casualties, no reserves, Soviet counterattack building. We were pulling back to the heights, giving up the ground we had bled for. I got Dietrich on his feet. He could walk barely. We stumbled back through the positions we had taken, past the bodies we had left behind, back to the trenches we had occupied yesterday. Retreat. The word tasted like defeat. The Soviet counterattack came at noon. Heavy. They committed what looked like a full battalion, maybe more. Fresh troops, properly equipped, advancing with armor support. T-34 tanks that our anti-tank guns could barely scratch at range. We had nothing heavier than 50mm guns. Insufficient, always insufficient. We held, somehow held, not through skill or courage, through inertia and the simple fact that retreating further meant death. The Soviet attack broke against our positions like waves against stone, eroding but not destroying. They paid in blood same as we did, mutual massacre. By nightfall, the battlefield was quiet again, both sides spent, unable to continue. A mutual exhaustion that passed for peace, temporary. Tomorrow would bring renewal, fresh orders, resumed killing. I found what remained of the company, 43 men. 43 out of 130, two-thirds gone in 5 days. The survivors were ghosts, hollow-eyed and silent. Shell-shock cases, most of them. Functional enough to hold a rifle but absent behind the eyes. Bodies without minds. September ended somewhere in this blur. October began without fanfare, without acknowledgement. The days had lost their distinction. There was only combat and rest, attack and defense, the endless cycle that ground us down incrementally. The weather turned on the 1st of October, though I only learned the date later from official reports. Rain came, cold and persistent, transforming the battlefield into a quagmire. The trenches filled with water that stank of chemicals and decay. Men stood in mud up to their knees, feet rotting in their boots. Trench foot became epidemic. The flesh went white and soft, then started to peel away in strips. Men who could still walk considered themselves fortunate. Supply lines stretched dangerously thin. Food arrived irregularly, often spoiled. We ate what we could, discarded the rest. Hunger became background noise, constant and manageable. The body adapted, learned to function on minimum calories. We became lean, skeletal. Uniforms hung loose on frames that had lost 20 kilograms in 3 months. Ammunition was rationed. Each rifleman received 10 rounds per day. Machine gun crews got 50. We fired single shots when we had been using automatic weapons, conserving, surviving, making do. The logistics officers did their best, but the mathematics were unforgiving. Trucks broke down, roads dissolved into mud, supply depots ran empty. The advance had outpaced our ability to sustain it. Dietrich returned from the field hospital on the 5th of October. His shoulder was immobilized in an elaborate sling, strapped tight against his chest. He should have been evacuated to Germany, classified unfit for combat. Instead, he walked back to the line and reported for duty. The medical officer had protested, had written up the paperwork for evacuation. Dietrich tore it up. Said his place was here. Insanity. Admirable. The same thing. He could not shoulder a rifle anymore, could not aim properly with one arm, effectively useless, but he could lead, could organize, could make decisions. I made him acting platoon leader. We had lost 2 of the 3 originals, needed someone with experience. He accepted without comment, as if this was natural, as if returning to combat with a crippling injury was reasonable. The company had been reinforced during his absence. Replacements arrived, young faces that still held innocence, eyes that had not yet learned what waited for them. 18-year-olds, some of them, fresh from training depots, full of enthusiasm and ideology. They believed in the mission, in victory, in all the propaganda they had been fed. I hated them instantly, not their fault, but they represented what we had been, reminded us of what we had lost: youth, hope, belief. They would learn. Those who survived would learn quickly. The others would die still innocent, never understanding what killed them. Some gift, perhaps, to die believing. The rest of us carried the burden of knowledge, knew exactly what we were doing here, understood the futility and horror, and participated anyway, because the alternative was unthinkable. I tried to prepare them, gave them the basic lessons that kept men alive. Keep your head down, fire in controlled bursts, watch your sectors, trust the man beside you. Simple rules that would save perhaps 1 in 3. The others would die regardless. Bad luck, poor positioning, enemy skill. Death played favorites, but it never took breaks. One of the replacements asked me how many battles I had been in. I could not answer. The question assumed discrete events, separate engagements with beginnings and ends. That was not how it worked here. There was one continuous battle, broken into segments only by exhaustion and darkness. We had been fighting for 5 days, or 5 weeks, or 5 months. The distinction was meaningless. Combat was our natural state. Peace was the aberration. I told him to clean his rifle and check his ammunition. He thanked me, for what I could not imagine. For not answering his question, perhaps. For treating him like he might survive long enough for advice to matter. October 10th, we attacked again. Different objective this time. A village 5 kilometers south of the heights. I never learned its name. All villages looked the same after shelling. Rubble and broken walls and charred timbers marking where homes had stood. Soviet troops defended the ruins, fighting from cellars and basements that our shells could not reach. Concrete foundations became bunkers. Destroyed buildings provided perfect defensive positions. The attack began at dawn. Standard procedure now: artillery preparation, smoke, infantry assault. We had learned nothing, or had learned everything, and could do nothing with the knowledge. The tactics were sound. The problem was the enemy, who persisted in defending competently, who refused to collapse despite overwhelming force. We cleared the village building by building. Room combat, close quarters where rifles were too long and pistols too weak. We used grenades, bayonets, entrenching tools. Primitive weapons for primitive work. Devolved to cavemen fighting with improvised clubs. The veneer of civilization stripped away, revealing the animal underneath. I killed a man with a shovel that day. He came out of a doorway as I passed, firing wildly. My rifle jammed, moisture in the bolt probably, condensation from the cold mixing with gun oil to create a paste that seized moving parts. I swung the shovel without thinking, caught him across the side of the head, felt the skull cave in under the impact, bone crushing like an eggshell. The sensation transmitted through the handle, unmistakable and terrible. He fell. I hit him again and again, until Dietrich pulled me away, until I stopped being an officer, stopped being human, became pure violence. The transformation was easy, frighteningly easy. Took seconds to cross the line from civilized man to killer. The return journey took longer. Hours later, I still felt the impact resonating in my hands, still saw his face in the instant before the shovel connected. That night I shook for hours, could not stop. Reaction delayed by adrenaline and necessity, flooding back once the immediate danger passed. My body purging the violence, trying to reject what I had done. It did not work. The memory remained, perfect and terrible, vivid. I could recall every detail, the sound the skull made, the way his eyes rolled back, the blood matting his hair. Perfect recall of horror. Dietrich found me in a corner of the bunker we had taken, hands still shaking. He did not ask what was wrong, did not need to, had seen it before, had probably experienced it himself. Simply sat beside me, his presence offering what comfort was possible, which was none. But the gesture mattered. He told me it got easier. The killing. The first was always hardest. After that, the moral weight diminished, spread across multiple acts until each individual death carried less gravity. Mathematics of conscience, murder by accounting. I did not want it to get easier, did not want to become the kind of man for whom killing was routine. But that ship had sailed, had been sinking since Poland, or earlier, October 15th. The offensive stalled completely. We held a rough line about 15 kilometers south of the ditch, no longer advancing. The Soviet defenses were too strong, our forces too depleted. Losses had been catastrophic, 30% casualties across the division, some regiments reduced to company strength. The replacements arrived too slowly, trained insufficiently. Quality declined as quantity increased. The army was consuming itself, burning through trained personnel faster than they could be replaced. We transitioned to defense, dug in for winter, though no one spoke the word aloud. Winter in Russia. The phrase carried too much weight, too much historical baggage. Napoleon's Grande Armée had frozen here. The Germans of the last war had bled out in the snow. We would be different, of course, better equipped, better led. The reassurances rang hollow even as command issued them. We built bunkers, improved trenches, stockpiled supplies. The work was constant, backbreaking. The ground froze at night, making digging nearly impossible. We used picks and bars, chipping away at earth that had turned to stone. Progress measured in centimeters. The cold intensified daily. October was not yet the brutal cold of December, but it was enough to make nights miserable. Frost formed on everything: equipment, weapons, the inside of tents. Water froze in canteens, despite our attempts to keep them warm. Men wrapped themselves in whatever they could find: Soviet overcoats stripped from corpses, blankets, canvas tarps. Improvisation had become our primary survival skill. Supplies improved slightly as the front stabilized. The logistics system caught up with our advance. Roads were repaired. Trucks got through more reliably. We received winter clothing, inadequate by Russian standards, but better than nothing. Woolen, long underwear that itched terribly, heavy overcoats that provided insufficient insulation, felt boots that were actually good. Soviet design copied by our quartermaster corps, better than German leather that froze solid and provided no warmth. Otto Zimmermann returned from the rear on October 20th. His leg had healed poorly, infection doing permanent damage. He walked with a pronounced limp, would carry it for life. He should have been discharged, sent home to recover properly. Instead, he had requested return to duty. The medical board had granted it. Manpower was too critical to refuse. Bodies were needed. Whether they functioned perfectly was secondary. He had changed. The enthusiasm was gone, burned away by infection and pain, and time to think. Hospital had given him perspective, distance from combat, opportunity to process what he had experienced. Some men returned from such reflection renewed, eager to rejoin their units. Others returned damaged, broken by knowledge they could not unlearn. Zimmermann was neither. He was quieter now, more like Dietrich than the boy he had been. Experience had carved away everything excess, leaving only the essential core. He no longer believed, just endured. It was a kind of maturity, hard-won and unfortunate. I missed the boy he had been while appreciating the soldier he had become. October 23rd, a quiet day. No major attacks, just the constant background noise of war, sniper fire, occasional artillery, the rattle of machine guns engaging targets real or imagined. We used the time to improve positions, repair equipment, write letters. The administration of war continued regardless of combat. I wrote to Huber's widow, not the official letter that had been sent weeks ago, bureaucratic condolence signed by someone who had never met him. A personal note trying to explain what her husband had meant to the company, how he had died, found it impossible to articulate. The words felt hollow, inadequate. How could I explain that he had died doing something meaningless, that his death had accomplished nothing, that he was missed but ultimately replaceable? I sent it anyway because silence was worse. She deserved something, even if that something was insufficient, was lies dressed in kind words. Franz Huber had been a good soldier, I wrote, had died bravely, quickly, had not suffered. All lies. He had been terrified, had suffered terribly in those 40 seconds, had died slowly enough to know it was happening. But truth served no purpose. Better the comforting fiction. Dietrich cleaned his rifle, always cleaning. The ritual had become meditation, a way to impose order on chaos. The bolt moved back and forth with familiar rhythm, metal on metal, precise and reassuring. He found peace in mechanical simplicity, in the knowledge that this one thing at least was under his control. If he maintained the weapon properly, it would function when needed. Simple cause and effect in a world where nothing else made sense. We talked about home that night, rare for us. Usually we did not speak of before, did not acknowledge that we had been people once, had lived lives outside this horror. But tonight, exhaustion or nostalgia or simple human need made us remember. Dietrich was from Bavaria, small town in the mountains whose name I have forgotten if I ever knew it. His father had been a woodworker, made furniture that people paid real money for. Beautiful pieces, he said, oak and cherry and pine, joints fitted so tight no glue was needed. Craftsmanship, pride in work, work that created instead of destroyed. He had learned the trade, planned to take over when his father retired. That was the plan. Before Poland, before France, before this. The war had erased plans, replaced them with the single driving need to survive one more day. Tomorrow could have plans. Today only had survival. I told him about my own past. University student, studying law in Munich. My father wanted me to join his practice, had dreams of dynasty, of Schulte and son spanning generations. Respectability, money, status, the comfortable life of professional class. I had wanted something else. What exactly I could not remember now. The ambitions of youth seemed remote, abstract. The war had come and erased all those small dreams, replaced them with something larger and more terrible. Purpose through destruction, meaning through violence. We sat in silence after that, listening to the sounds of night, distant artillery always present, the wind through destroyed buildings, whistling through gaps like ghost voices, men coughing in the dark, lungs damaged by gas and smoke and cold, the sounds of war at rest, which was never really rest, just waiting, always waiting for the next crisis. Someone was singing, voice carrying across the darkness, German folk song, something from childhood. The melody evoked memories I could barely access. Warmth, safety, innocence, concepts that belonged to another life, another person. I was not that person anymore, could never be again. The war had remade me, carved away everything soft and human, left only the hard core capable of surviving this. October 27th. Orders came down for a final push, one more attack to break the Soviet line, they said. This time would be different, this time would work. The breakthrough would come. We had heard it all before, had stopped believing weeks ago. But we went anyway, because that was what soldiers did. Believed or not, we went. The attack launched at 0600, full division strength, what remained of it. They had pulled units from across the front, concentrated forces for this thrust. Tanks, assault guns, artillery support, everything we had left thrown at the Soviet positions in one desperate gamble. The last roll of the dice before winter made further offensive operations impossible. I led what remained of the company, 38 men now, after more losses to disease, accidents, random artillery. We had become a ghost unit, company in name only. Barely a reinforced platoon in actual strength. But we were what was available, so we went forward with everyone else. The artillery preparation was impressive. Sustained bombardment for 2 hours, shells falling without pause. The ground ahead disappeared under smoke and fire. Buildings that had survived earlier shelling collapsed completely. Trees, those few still standing, vanished, blasted to splinters. When the guns finally stopped, the landscape had been transformed, lunar, alien. Nothing lived in that wasteland. We advanced behind a creeping barrage, shells landing 50 meters ahead, walking forward as we followed. The theory was the shells would keep Soviet heads down, allow us to close with minimal casualties. Theory and practice diverged. Soviet artillery answered ours, shells dropping among the advancing infantry. Men vanished in explosions, simply ceased to exist. Others went down wounded, screaming for medics who were already overwhelmed. I moved forward in a crouch, rifle ready. The ground was torn, cratered, barely recognizable as earth, more like moon dust, gray and fine, covering everything. It got in eyes, in mouths, in weapons, clogged everything, made breathing difficult, made seeing impossible. We navigated by compass and dead reckoning, following the man ahead, hoping he knew where he was going. The Soviet line appeared suddenly. Not a line, a series of strong points, mutually supporting, covering all approaches with overlapping fields of fire. Well designed, professional. They had used the time while we stalled to improve their defenses, to prepare for exactly this attack. We went to ground, seeking whatever cover existed, shell holes mostly, shallow depressions that provided minimal protection. Soviet machine guns opened up, tracers floating toward us in lazy arcs that accelerated to killing speed at the last instant. The sound was continuous, that tearing cloth rattle of Maxims firing at maximum rate. To our left, tanks were engaging Soviet positions, panzers, some with 75mm guns, others with 50, cracking steadily at targets. Shells impacted on bunkers, on trenches, on anything that looked like a target. Effective at range. Less so when Soviet anti-tank guns returned fire. I watched a panzer take a direct hit, the shell penetrating the turret. The tank stopped, began burning. No one got out. Quick deaths at least. Better than burning. We waited for the tanks to do their work, to suppress enough positions for infantry to advance. The wait stretched. Minutes felt like hours. Every second exposed was a second closer to death. Men died waiting. Snipers, mortars, machine gun fire finding them in their holes. Random death, arbitrary and unstoppable. Finally the order came. Advance. We rose and rushed forward, sprinting the 50 meters to the first Soviet trench. Lost 3 men in that sprint. How, I did not see, just knew they were gone when we reached cover. 3 out of 38, 8% casualties in 30 seconds. The mathematics were unsustainable, but we kept calculating anyway. The Soviet line buckled almost immediately. Not from our attack, they were retreating, pulling back to new positions deeper into Crimea, giving up the Perekop, not because we had broken them, but because holding it cost too much. A strategic withdrawal, professional and well executed. They took everything of value, wounded, equipment, supplies, destroyed what they could not carry, left only corpses and mines. The trenches we captured were empty, abandoned. We had been fighting ghosts, attacking positions already evacuated. The realization was frustrating and relieving. We had won without winning, had taken ground without fighting for it. By noon on October 28th, the Perekop Isthmus was ours. The gateway to Crimea had fallen, 5 weeks after we had started the assault. 5 weeks that felt like 5 years. 5 weeks that had cost nearly everything. The cost was staggering when someone finally tallied it. The division had started with 15,000 men. We ended with perhaps 8,000 combat-effective troops, nearly half casualties. Dead, wounded, missing, sick, gone. Some regiments had ceased to exist as functional units, been absorbed into others, their numbers too depleted to justify independent existence. My company had begun with 130 men on September 24th. 38 remained on October 28th. 71% casualties. Unsustainable by any measure. Replaceable only through constant flow of bodies from the rear. Training depots emptied to fill frontline units that existed only on paper. We occupied the former Soviet positions and looked south toward Crimea proper. Mountains rose in the distance, snow-capped and beautiful. The campaign would continue. This had been just the entrance, the bloody vestibule. The real fighting lay ahead. Sevastopol, Kerch, all the places the staff had marked on maps as objectives. More battles, more dying. The war continuing until everyone was dead or one side surrendered. But that was future. That was tomorrow. Tonight we had survived. Against all probability, against all logic, we had lived to see another day. That had to be enough, had to suffice, because wanting more was pointless. I sat in a captured bunker and tried to feel victory. Could not. Victory required emotion and I had none left, just emptiness. A hollow shell going through motions, performing functions without feeling. Numb, deadened, surviving without living. Dietrich found me at dusk. His shoulder was healing, the sling removed earlier that week. He moved carefully, but without obvious pain, resilient, adaptable. The human capacity for endurance was terrible and magnificent. We could survive almost anything if survival was the only goal. He asked what I thought of the victory. I said it did not feel like victory, felt like survival. Temporary, fragile survival purchased at horrific cost. We would do this again tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, until we died or the war ended. And the war would not end soon. Years remaining, years of this. The thought was unbearable but had to be borne. He accepted this. We sat together as night fell over the Perekop, watching the sky fade from grey to black. Stars emerged, cold and distant and indifferent to the suffering below. The universe continued regardless of human pain. That should have been comforting. Made it worse, somehow. Our struggles meant nothing on that scale. Would be forgotten. We would die for ground that would be retaken and lost again, fighting for objectives that meant nothing except on maps, drawn by men who never came near the killing. Somewhere to the south, the Crimean mountains rose against the horizon. Beautiful, probably, in daylight. We would see them up close soon enough. Would fight across them, die on them. Geography as enemy, terrain as obstacle. Mountains to take, valleys to clear, cities to reduce to rubble. The work continuing endlessly. But that was tomorrow's war. Tonight we had the bunker, had food, real food, Soviet supplies they had not had time to destroy. Had momentary safety, however illusory. It was enough, had to be enough, because tomorrow would bring its own horrors, its own necessities, and we would face them as we had faced Perekop, with exhaustion and determination, and the grim knowledge that survival was luck, not skill. I thought about the men we had lost, Huber first, then so many others, their names blurred together. 73 dead, whose faces I could barely remember, whose letters I had written in batches, documenting their sacrifice in reports that no one would read. It seemed important, necessary. Someone should remember, even if memory brought only pain, even if remembering changed nothing. Dietrich pulled out his rifle, began cleaning it again. The bolt moved with practiced ease, the rhythm as familiar as breathing, metal on metal, precise and reassuring. He found peace in mechanical simplicity. I envied him that. My own peace was more distant, harder to find. Perhaps gone completely. Some things, once lost, could not be recovered. Innocence, faith, the belief that any of this mattered. We sat through the night. Two men who had survived when so many had not, felt no pride in that survival, just guilt, irrational and persistent. Why us? Why not Huber or Kraus or any of the 73 who had died? Luck was the only answer. Random chance. The bullet found them and missed us by centimeters, by seconds, by pure accident. Next time it would find us. Simple probability. The house always won eventually. Dawn came slowly on October 29th, 1941. A new day, another day. We would face it as we had faced all the others, with exhaustion and determination and the knowledge that death waited, patient and certain. Tomorrow, or the day after, or the day after that. Eventually the mathematics would catch up. Eventually the luck would run out. The war continued. Would continue for years yet, though we did not know that then, sitting in that bunker as dawn broke over Crimea. Did not know about Stalingrad, about Kursk, about the long retreat back to Germany and beyond. Did not know about defeat and occupation and all the years after. Perhaps that ignorance was mercy. The present was sufficient horror without adding the future. But we knew about the Perekop. Knew what it cost to take 5 kilometers of ground, to breach a medieval ditch, to climb 2 small hills. Knew the price of victory measured in bodies and blood and sanity. Knew that victory tasted like defeat, like ash, like nothing at all. I was Hauptmann Friedrich Schulte, 31 years old, survivor of Perekop. The title meant nothing. Survival meant nothing. Tomorrow I would fight again, or I would die. The outcome was irrelevant. The machine required feeding. I was fuel for the machine. We all were. That was what soldiers were: consumables, resources, numbers on casualty reports. The sun rose over Crimea, painting the mountains gold and red. Beautiful. The sky cared nothing for the ground below, for the bodies rotting in the mud, for the broken men who stumbled through another day. Indifference as absolute as it was eternal. Dietrich finished cleaning his rifle, loaded it, set it beside him ready, always ready. Preparation was survival. Ritual was sanity. The small things that kept men human when everything screamed to stop, to rest, to die. We waited for orders. They would come eventually. They always came. The machine needed feeding, needed bodies to throw at objectives marked on maps by men who would never see the ground we bled for. We were the bodies. Willing or unwilling made no difference. The machine consumed without discrimination. The company formed up. Those who could walk, who could hold a weapon. 38 men, pathetic, magnificent. Still standing after 5 weeks of hell, still willing to do it again because that was what soldiers did. We marched toward death because someone ordered it. Simple, terrible, necessary. I inspected them as they assembled, recognized perhaps half. The rest were replacements, arrived during the night while I had been dealing with casualty reports and ammunition requisitions. Fresh faces among the scarred veterans. You could tell them apart instantly. The veterans moved differently, economically, conserving energy for when it mattered. The replacements were energetic, eager, doomed. One of them, could not have been more than 19, asked where we were going. South, I said, into Crimea. Beyond that, I did not know. Command did not share strategic objectives with company commanders. We learned destinations when we arrived, usually under fire. The replacement nodded as if this made sense. Perhaps it did to him. Perhaps his world still operated on logic and reason. Mine had abandoned such luxuries weeks ago. The veterans knew better than to ask questions. They simply formed up, checked their weapons, distributed remaining ammunition among themselves. The ritual of preparation, performed without thought or comment. Muscle memory taking over when conscious thought would have led to paralysis. We moved south at 0800. The road, if it could be called that, was little more than a track, churned to mud by the passage of thousands of men and vehicles. Each step required effort, boots sucking at the mud, calves burning with the constant exertion. Progress was measured in meters per hour rather than kilometers. The landscape had been devastated. Nothing remained that resembled civilization. Villages were ruins, fields were cratered moonscape, forests were fields of splintered stumps. The land itself had died, poisoned by high explosive and chemical residue. Nothing would grow here for years, maybe decades. The earth would carry these scars long after the men who inflicted them were dust. We passed a column of Soviet prisoners being marched north, thousands of them grey and exhausted, guarded by men who looked nearly as beaten. The prisoners moved in silence, too tired or too broken for speech. Some could barely walk, supported by comrades who were themselves near collapse. War reduced everyone to the same condition eventually, exhausted, filthy, damaged. The uniforms differed, but the humanity underneath was identical. One of the prisoners made eye contact with me as they passed. His eyes were old, far older than his face. He had seen what I had seen, done what I had done. Different sides of the same horror. I looked away first, uncomfortable with the recognition. Easier to think of them as enemy, as other. Harder when you saw yourself reflected in their eyes. We stopped at noon for food. Tinned meat and hard bread, eaten standing because sitting meant you might not get up again. The food was tasteless but necessary. Fuel for bodies that ran on minimum resources. I forced myself to eat, to chew and swallow, to provide my body what it needed to continue functioning. Zimmerman joined me, limping heavily. His leg was bothering him more today. Cold weather made it worse, he said. The damaged tissue responded badly to temperature changes. Would probably hurt for the rest of his life. A souvenir of Perekop. A permanent reminder of 5 weeks in hell. He asked how many we had left. I told him, 38 out of 130. He absorbed this without expression, had probably already done the mathematics himself, knew what the numbers meant. We were no longer a company in any meaningful sense. We were a fragment, held together by shared trauma and stubborn refusal to admit we were finished. He asked if command would reinforce us. Eventually, I said, when they had bodies to spare, which might be never. The entire army was bleeding, hemorrhaging personnel at rates that could not be sustained. Training depots were empty. The pipeline of replacements had run dry. We would fight with what we had until what we had was nothing. The march resumed at 1300. My feet had gone numb, which was a blessing. Pain would come later when we stopped and blood flow returned. For now, numbness allowed me to continue putting one foot in front of the other. The simple mechanics of walking became all-consuming. Step, 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 repeat until ordered otherwise. We reached our assigned position at 1700 hours, another trench line, this one hastily dug by pioneers who had preceded us. Shallow, barely adequate, but better than nothing. We would deepen it tonight, improve the firing positions, add overhead cover. The work never stopped. Even in supposed rest, there was always work. Dietrich organized the positions, assigned sectors, established watch rotations. He did it automatically, without need for orders from me. Command by habit, leadership through example. The men trusted him more than they trusted me. Understandable. He had been with them longer, had bled with them. I was merely the officer who signed the casualty reports. Night fell quickly. October nights came early this far south. The temperature dropped rapidly once the sun set. We huddled in the trenches, wrapped in whatever we had, and tried to stay warm, tried and failed. Cold seeped into everything, invaded despite layers of clothing, settled in bones and joints, made movement painful, made sleep impossible. Soviet artillery opened up around midnight, not targeting us specifically. Harassment fire, random shells dropped across the front to keep everyone awake and anxious. Psychological warfare, effective and cheap. The shells landed close enough to feel, far enough away not to kill, usually. Sometimes bad luck put one directly on target and men died in their sleep. Better than dying awake, perhaps. Small mercy. I sat with my back against the trench wall and tried to remember what day it was. October 29th, someone said, or 30th. The dates had stopped mattering. There was only now, this moment, this cold, wet misery. Tomorrow would bring more of the same. Yesterday had brought identical horrors. Time had collapsed into eternal present. Tried to remember what I had been before this. Student, son. Someone with plans and dreams and a future that extended beyond the next artillery barrage. That person felt remote, fictional, a character in a story I had once read. I could not connect him to the man I had become. The transformation had been total. Wondered if I could go back, if the war ended tomorrow, if I somehow survived and returned home, could I become that person again? Probably not. War did not release its hold easily. I had seen veterans of the last war, hollow men who jumped at loud noises, who could not sleep without nightmares. That would be me if I survived, which I probably would not. Dietrich joined me sometime after midnight. Could not sleep, he said. Too cold, too much pain. He had refused stronger medication, said he needed to stay alert. Control was all we had left. We sat in silence, listening to the night sounds. Artillery, wind, men coughing. He asked what I would do after the war. Maybe nothing, I said. Sit somewhere quiet and wait for the nightmares to stop, if they ever stopped. Huber would visit me in sleep, reaching out with that blood-slick hand. 73 dead men would parade through my dreams. No answer existed that would satisfy them. Dietrich said he planned to return to woodworking, assuming he survived. Too many assumptions. Better not to hope. Dawn came eventually, October 30th or 31st. The dates no longer mattered. There was only combat and rest, hunger and cold. Everything else had been stripped away. Orders came at dawn, advance again. We went because that was what we did. We moved south throughout the day, encountered minimal resistance. The Soviets were withdrawing. We advanced across empty ground, captured abandoned positions. By evening, we had covered 15 kilometers. Cost, 3 men from exhaustion and exposure. Night again, counted the company, 35 men, 73% casualties. We were dying slowly but certainly. The days that followed merged together. We advanced, we dug in, we advanced again. By mid-November, we had pushed nearly 70 kilometers into Crimea. The company was down to 28 men. The cold intensified. November brought real winter. Men died from exposure. Frostbite claimed fingers and toes. The weather became as deadly as bullets. Supply lines stretched thin again. We scrounged from the dead. The battlefield became our supply depot. Dietrich's shoulder deteriorated. The wound reopened, infection setting in. He refused evacuation. Zimmerman's leg worsened. Both should have been sent to hospital. Both stayed. The offensive continued into December, then January. The cold intensified beyond anything we had experienced. Men died in their sleep, froze solid overnight. The company dwindled. 20 men, 15, 10, always fewer. Dietrich finally had to be evacuated in late November. The infection had spread. His departure broke something in the unit. He had been our constant. Zimmerman took over as my second despite his ruined leg. The men trusted him. He was one of the few originals remaining. By December, we had advanced nearly 100 kilometers into Crimea. The cost was total. Of the 130 men who had stood at the Perekop on September 24th, only Zimmerman and I remained. Everyone else was dead or permanently disabled. Gone. I was still Hauptmann Friedrich Schulte, 31 years old, survivor. The title meant nothing. I had become what I feared, a hollow man. The war had won, but the shell continued, would continue until the mathematics caught up, because that was what soldiers did. We marched, fought, died, were replaced. We were fuel, nothing more. I was Hauptmann Friedrich Schulte, commander of ghosts, leading dead men who had not yet stopped walking. We marched under the beautiful indifferent sky. The sun climbed higher. The war continued.